Every government says the same thing when its money starts to shake. We're protecting our independence. We won't bow to foreign pressure. We're following our own path. Turkey says it too. But while the speeches talk about sovereignty, ordinary people in Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir are watching rents, food, and electricity climb faster than their paychecks. The lira has bled value year after year, slipping to new record lows, while inflation has swung from painful to absurd. People are not reading central bank reports. They're watching the price of bread and the cost of heating a small apartment, and they know something is wrong. So here's the uncomfortable paradox. Turkey says it's defending its economic independence. But the more it fights interest rates and outside influence, the more its own currency slides and the more ordinary Turks lose control of their own lives. So which matters more in the real world, independence or inflation? And at what point does sovereignty become just another word for being trapped inside a burning building with no exits? Every crisis comes with a story attached. Turkey's story, on the surface, is simple. A proud nation at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, tired of being lectured by Washington, Brussels, and the IMF, tired of being told what interest rates should be, how much to borrow, which reforms are acceptable to foreign investors, tired of being treated like a student instead of a sovereign state. So the leadership promised something powerful. We'll run our economy our way. We will not sacrifice growth and independence just to comfort nervous markets abroad. It's a compelling narrative. It taps into real humiliation from the past. For decades, Turkey wrestled with chronic inflation, periodic crashes, and painful IMF programs that came with spending cuts, tax hikes, and foreign fingerprints on domestic policy. After the brutal crisis in the early 2000s, many Turks felt they had already paid the price for stability. But money doesn't listen to speeches. Money listens to incentives. To understand how the lira ended up sliding, gasping, constantly stabilized but never stable, you have to go back to the moment when Turkey thought it had finally tamed its demons. After its earlier crisis, Turkey did what collapsing economies usually do when they want credibility back. It signed up for strict programs, cut spending, raised taxes, and rebuilt its central bank with a clear mandate: fight inflation first. A new legal framework gave the bank more independence. Interest rates were used aggressively to cool prices. Inflation, which had haunted the country for decades, was finally beaten down. The lira was even reborn. In the mid-2000s, the government chopped 6 zeros off the old currency. Overnight, 1 million lira became 1 new lira. It was a psychological reset, a signal that the age of runaway inflation was over. Growth surged. Foreign investors poured in. They bought Turkish bonds, Turkish stocks, Turkish real estate. International magazines featured Turkey as an emerging market success story, a bridge economy finally stepping into the modern financial world. But there's always a catch hidden inside that kind of success. When your stability depends on foreign capital, low global interest rates, and the goodwill of investors sitting in London, New York, and Frankfurt, your independence is conditional. You're credible as long as you play by the rules of someone else's game. Those rules are simple. Keep inflation under control, keep your central bank relatively independent, and don't surprise the markets too often. Inside Turkey, there was always a current of anger against that arrangement. To some, high interest rates looked like a tribute paid to foreigners. To others, IMF deals and orthodox policy looked like a quiet surrender of sovereignty. Behind the numbers, they saw outsiders telling Turkey how fast it was allowed to grow. So when one man consolidated power and brought his own economic philosophy into the heart of policy, the tension between inflation and independence stopped being an academic debate and turned into a national experiment. Recep Tayyip Erdogan has never hidden his feelings about interest rates. He has called them evil, accused an interest rate lobby of trying to sabotage the country, and publicly pressured his own central bank when it tried to raise rates too far, too fast. In classic economics, higher rates are the standard weapon against inflation. In Erdogan's worldview, higher rates actually cause inflation. The medicine, in his eyes, is the disease. Put those beliefs into the driver's seat, and the stage is set. On one side, you have the traditional model, a central bank that raises rates when inflation rises, even if it hurts growth in the short term. That model buys you credibility. It reassures investors that their savings won't be wiped out by price spikes. It's not glamorous, and it often feels harsh at home, but it keeps your currency anchored. On the other side, you have the new promise: cheap credit, rapid growth, resistance to foreign pressure, and a leader who openly declares that high interest rates are the enemy. This model feels good at first. Loans are cheaper, growth numbers look strong, construction booms. Politicians can point to new bridges, tunnels, airports, and apartment blocks as proof that the country is moving forward. For a while, you can live between those worlds. You can pressure the central bank in private, criticize it in public, but still allow it enough room to keep inflation from exploding. You can reassure investors just enough to keep money flowing in, even as you quietly bend the rules. But reality doesn't negotiate forever. By the late 2010s, the pressure that had been building underneath finally broke the surface. Inflation, which had been contained, began to climb again. The lira started to weaken more quickly against the dollar and the euro. At first, it was a slide, then it became a drop. Suddenly, the exchange rate levels that once seemed ridiculous were appearing on phone screens as the new normal. Foreign investors looked at the picture and saw something simple: a central bank under political pressure, a president openly hostile to high rates, rising external debt, energy imports priced in foreign currency, growing tensions with other countries. They did what investors always do when they smell risk. They demanded higher returns, or they left. Inside Turkey, the story was told another way. The government talked about economic warfare, currency attacks, conspiracies. Foreign powers were accused of trying to bring the country to its knees through its currency. The lira, in this narrative, wasn't just money. It was a battlefield. Markets can be emotional, and sometimes they are unfair. But under the panic and noise, a simple mechanic was at work. If you weaken your central bank's independence, if you signal that politics will override the fight against inflation, your currency becomes a harder sell. Investors don't need to hate you, they just need to doubt you. The more the leadership fought interest rates in the name of independence, the more the lira was forced to bow to something much colder than politics: arithmetic. Then came the second act: unorthodox policy, fully entrenched. Instead of using higher rates to choke off rising inflation, Turkey doubled down on low rates. Cuts continued even as prices rose. Official inflation surged into double digits, then kept climbing. Independent groups inside the country began publishing their own estimates, and those estimates painted an even darker picture than the official data. Ordinary people didn't need a chart to see what was happening. They saw it every time they went grocery shopping. The lira's path mirrored the prices in the markets. What had once been a reasonably strong emerging market currency became a chronic weakling. In the space of a few years, it lost a huge share of its value against the dollar. Each new floor became a ceiling that shattered a few months later. Exchange rate figures that would once have been considered an emergency now appeared as just another line of text in a news ticker. On paper, Turkey was still sovereign. There was no IMF program. No foreign technocrat was sitting in Ankara dictating policy. No external institution had veto power over the country's budget. In practice, the price of that visible autonomy was being paid by people who never sat in any meeting. Families whose rent was renegotiated in foreign currency terms, rising again and again until it swallowed most of their income. Workers whose wages were renegotiated too, but always on a delay, always chasing prices that move faster than their pay. Shopkeepers who couldn't keep up with labeling and relabeling shelves. Savers who had done everything right and kept money in the bank, only to watch years of effort melt when their currency crumbled. Independence is a powerful slogan. Inflation is a brutal reality. When inflation gets bad enough, governments reach for tricks. They can admit defeat, raise interest rates sharply, take the pain up front, and hope to rebuild credibility. Or they can try to buy time. Turkey tried one of the most creative versions of buying time: foreign exchange protected deposits. The offer sounded patriotic and generous at the same time. Keep your savings in lira, the state said. Don't rush into dollars and euros. If the lira falls too much, we'll compensate you for the loss. We'll cover the difference. For households desperate to protect their money, it sounded like a lifeline. For the government, it looked like a way to slow the panic without admitting that the core policy was wrong. For a while, it worked. People signed up. The stock of these protected deposits grew into tens of billions of dollars worth in lira terms. The currency stabilized a bit. The immediate fire seemed under control. But there's always a bill hiding inside financial miracles. If you promise to compensate people for exchange rate losses, and the exchange rate keeps sliding, someone has to pay. Either the central bank takes the hit, or the government budget does, or both. The scheme doesn't erase the underlying problem. It just moves the pain from savers today to taxpayers tomorrow. That is the pattern with almost every trick. You can shift the burden. You can delay it. You can hide it in a different corner of the system, but you can't erase it by decree. The more you defend independence with short-term fixes and complex schemes instead of credible, consistent policy, the more you become dependent on something far more fragile: the patience of your own citizens. So what is Turkey independent from now, and what is it dependent on? It is independent from the IMF. It is independent from a formal external supervisor signing off on each reform. There is no treaty binding interest rates to a foreign rulebook. No one in Washington is legally allowed to tell Ankara what to do. But in exchange, Turkey has become deeply dependent on forces that don't take phone calls and don't attend press conferences. It depends on capital flows that can leave at the click of a mouse. It depends on imported energy and raw materials priced in foreign currency. It depends on the willingness of ordinary people to continue using, earning, and saving in a currency they watch weaken month after month. And perhaps most dangerously, it depends on an illusion. The illusion that you can shout about independence from foreign money while your citizens quietly redenominate their lives in that very same foreign money. When families start thinking in dollars or euros instead of lira, when the question isn't how many lira is my rent, but how many dollars is this really? Your true unit of account isn't your own currency anymore. The anchor in people's minds has already moved abroad. That is the quiet irony of Turkey's trajectory. In the name of resisting foreign influence, the credibility of the central bank was undermined. In the name of protecting growth, interest rates were kept low even as prices raced ahead. In the name of sovereignty, the lira was sacrificed. And when your currency is sacrificed, your citizens don't gain freedom. They lose it. They lose the freedom to plan because no one knows what next month's prices will be. They lose the freedom to save because keeping cash feels like a slow-motion robbery. They lose the freedom to trust that the number on a bank screen represents stable value rather than melting ice. In recent years, Turkey has tried to swing back toward orthodoxy. New economic teams have come in with promises to fight inflation. Interest rates have been raised aggressively at times. Inflation has cooled somewhat from its highest peaks, only to remain far above official targets. The lira continues to slide, sometimes in sharp moves, sometimes in what looks like a managed drift, but always in the same direction. So has the lesson been learned? Or only rented for a moment? That is the harder question. Because the deeper lesson that history teaches is not just about Turkey. It is about the nature of monetary independence itself. Monetary independence isn't just the legal ability to say no to foreign institutions. It is the practical ability to say no to yourself, no to short-term political pressure, no to the temptation to juice growth ahead of an election with cheap credit, no to programs that feel good today and send the bill to people who can T-vote yet, no to the comforting lie that you can print or borrow your way to prosperity without consequence. A central bank is only independent if it can raise interest rates when it is politically painful, tighten policy, when everyone is screaming for easy money, and protect the purchasing power of the currency, even when the government would rather do something else. Otherwise, it isn't a shield. It's a logo on the door of another ministry. If you live far from Turkey, you might be tempted to treat this as a distant drama, a foreign story, someone else's problem. But Turkey isn't an exception. It is a demonstration. It shows in fast motion what happens when a country tries to choose political control over monetary credibility and still play in a global system where money can move across borders in seconds. Every country faces the same trade-off, even if the speeches sound different and the flags have different colors. Do you want the appearance of independence, fiery rhetoric, attacks on outsiders, low interest rates, endless promises that everything is under control? Or do you want the substance of independence? Institutions strong enough to say no, boring technocrats willing to be hated in the short run to avoid disaster in the long run, a currency that doesn't deforce its own citizens to run from it? History is ruthless on this question. The details change, the pattern doesn't. From Latin American hyperinflations to collapses in Eastern Europe, from post-war experiments to modern crises, the same script repeats. Governments that treat interest rates as a political toy, that bully their central banks, that try to grow faster than their real capacity allows, all eventually pay through inflation and devaluation. Their money fails, first quietly, then suddenly, and the people with the least protection pay the highest price. Turkey has simply compressed this lesson into a very visible case study. It has turned an abstract textbook debate into empty wallets, changing price tags and currency charts that look like cliffs. For the unprepared, it's a tragedy. For anyone paying attention, it's a warning. If your leaders talk constantly about growth but rarely about price stability, pay attention. If they rage against interest rates but stay strangely quiet when your money buys less every year, pay attention. If every market reaction is dismissed as a foreign plot, while no one ever admits that policy itself might be the problem, pay attention. You might be watching the same movie and it's just dubbed into another language. Turkey's lira is more than a currency. It's a mirror. On one side of that mirror is inflation, the slow, grinding theft of purchasing power that turns savers into losers and salaries into jokes. On the other side is independence, not the kind shouted from balconies, but the quiet, disciplined independence of institutions that can resist both foreign and domestic pressure. Turkey tried to grab one side of that mirror and ignore the other. The result has been exactly what history would predict. A weakened currency, a squeezed middle class, and a state constantly inventing new programs to patch a system it keeps undermining. In the end, inflation and independence are not enemies. They are cause and effect. When you sacrifice real institutional independence, you don't escape pressure from abroad. You invite a different kind of pressure, from markets, from your own citizens, from the uncompromising math of compound inflation. You can deny it, postpone it, disguise it, but you cannot cancel it. And when the reckoning comes, it rarely lands first on the people who designed the system. It lands on those who trusted it. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.